must
It'd be
really
interesting,
stress
it'd be interesting to see how it works.
interpreter.
No, I don't. I think Chris.
It's only like 10,000 lines of code.
I think Chris is just going to see how it works. It's definitely a neat way to approach
We're going to
that.
check it in. Like it's going to be. We're not like taking upstream Lua all the time. We're going to take Lua is done. It's finished.
So Lua is like less than 10% of the size of ZFS, so it's not ridiculous.
I mean, if there's bugs in it, we fix. I mean, the alternative is to actually write the sync tasks. It's not like that's not going to be bug free either.
So it's 10,000 lines.
20,000 lines, but we rip out all the standards. They have like standard libraries for I/O and stuff, and we don't need the lexer or the parser.
We should keep track of like how many lines, like
Is there any Windows on?
Something like this is just really useful.
Yeah, I mean, and there's weird like bug cases.
So you're the second.
The atomic operations have been broken. I want to have because like with ZVols you
If you
have
just
to
reinstalled it, it's running
change the
ZFS.
volume size, and then you have to set a reservation. And if the reservation failed, the volume size wouldn't get reset back. So you'd have like this weird system of little buggy things that have existed forever.
My gut fear blew up, which is probably unfounded. You said, I'm using custom language.
Okay, let me remember. I'm sorry. Hold on. Let me go back. We're going to write our own new language, domain-specific language, parse it to bytecode, and send it down to the kernel.
That gives me less of a gut reaction.
Okay. But you have a bad gut.
I forgot to mention earlier, if you didn't get a t-shirt because you didn't publish your size, let me know. I can here. And then we don't have new badges for tomorrow. You can bring your badge or not. I figure not everyone's going to remember everybody's name, so like it's either leave it here and just grab it in the morning or just make sure you're back.
And also there's,
I don't want to take it back home.
there's some swag out there that people have donated. There's some Delphix bottle openers. Is that right?
Yep, there's some there's fans.
There's some
from
fans from
Japan.
Japan.
I'm not taking them back.
There's what else is there?
There's some flashlights
from.
and then there's some, the flashlights are from high availability, and then there's some thumb drives, 4 gig thumb drives from IX Systems, as well as the
Do you want to send me the link?
No, it's a safe, like it's a sandbox environment. Like,
at least for Linux kernel, once you're in the kernel, you can touch anything.
well, you're running. You don't
That's not true. I mean, if you're the Lua code can't touch anything though.
No, it can't build to the kernel context.
Any random memory address and go get it.
I think
No,
what Fred
Lua
says
can't do
that
that.
if the interpreter is buggy, it's up to the interpreter to
Okay.
sandbox.
Yes, the
Bugs in
interpreter
the
has to be
interpreter allow it to.
The interpreter, as with all code in the kernel, needs to be correct.
Right.
So I have a concern because the language says, I think NetBSD has it in one C file.
Oh yeah, NetBSD actually NetBSD is putting Lua into the kernel to write drivers in or something like even more hardcore.
That's also. The long-term idea that metal plates, you say the pack or whatever plates. I mean,
I think that because right now the actual interface, like every time we make a minor change, it's like add a new flag or do this or do that, and then you like because every time what they were saying before was every time you add a new feature, you have to plummet all the way up through the stack and add new IOCTLs and everything. So this would be one IOCTL you send down, 2 IOCTLs, one to send down a program and the other to execute it. Because you want the privileged user to say like, here are all the, you could replace, you could add no new functionality and just have all of the existing functionality written as Lua programs and easily
Okay, exciting. So, John is going to talk to us about test coverage.
I'm John Kennedy. I work at Delphix. Before being at Delphix, I was at Sun, and I worked in RP doing support for ZFS and eventually QA. And that's my email address down at the bottom there. So if you find, like I do often, once the presentation is over, you have questions that you wanted to ask at the time, please feel free to drop me a mail and let me know. So basically, what I want to do today is go through a history of ZFS testing as I've known it, and also find out what the state of the world is in terms of what the other distributions are doing. I know a little bit about what's going on, but I'm sure I have some gaps and misconceptions, and hopefully we can clear them up and start enlightening about them. So even from a Delphix specific point of view, there's still work to be done on the ZFS testing. There's lots of things on my to-do list. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and then I'm going to shift to kind of a more interactive discussion to kind of get a sense of what kind of direction we want for testing with respect to OpenZFS for the benefit of all, right? And please interrupt with questions. It'll be a lot better that way. So when I first encountered the ZFS test suite, it was actually as a user, and it was kind of a pain to configure and install and get running. Other people can probably corroborate that who've used it. STF is the Solaris test framework. It's used for a lot of different tests in the Solaris test collection. Lots of file systems, network drivers, things like that. Sun opened it in late 2009, and then after the Oracle takeover and sort of the closure in that regard, it kind of stagnated. It fell through the cracks a little bit. We picked it up in Delphix and got it running because there had been such a long period of divergence between what was actually happening in the community and the test, which really hadn't progressed at all. It took a lot of work to get the test failures running. I'm sure you guys probably had similar, or it was the BSD guys, right? Who done that? Yeah. They'd probably done similar work. So we fixed it up and we got it posted on GitHub. It's still there now, but we found that STF had some difficulties that were incompatible with some of the things we wanted for our test suite. For example, we wanted it to live with the source, and because of some of the usability issues with STF and because of kind of its peculiar ways of building, we decided to write another test framework from scratch. And so that's how we got the test runner. It is like a hopefully easy to use, or easier to use at any rate, kind of low overhead framework. We integrated that into Illumos in 2012 with a handful of tests, and then very recently we was that actually pushed?
I didn't actually do the push, but
okay.
It was out for review.
It's out for review. Like the remainder of the tests are all up there, and internally within Delphix, that's the framework that we use for our nightly tests and all of our regression work. And so that's kind of the current state of the world from the Delphix point of view. Any questions so far? Nope. So what do we still have to do specifically at my day-to-day job? These are the sorts of things that I'm thinking about for the test suite. There's a few features and properties that don't really have coverage yet, and that's obviously a high priority. We have some work to do there. Matt recently started using the test runner suite himself, and he found a couple of usability enhancements, so that's another thing on my to-do list. Let's see. Oh yeah, there's some areas that are like we have coverage for them, but the coverage could be more complete in terms of what those tests apply to, even when they were written, and also the features that they apply to have sort of grown in the interim. And so send receive is probably the best example of that. There's a good deal of work that needs to be done to improve those tests.
So this is like because more flags have been added and things like that.
Right. So there's more flags,
But like
and
it can be used in combination with new feature X, Y, or Z.
the send receive tests could have been more thorough in the first place, like even at the time. So there's that. And so obviously, all of those points apply to OpenZFS as it exists today. But in addition, we have to decide a number of things about how we want the tests to work. What should OpenZFS tests look like, right? The first question is, do we want a common set of tests for all the distributions? You could probably tell what my answer to this question is. The benefits of having a common set of tests are, like, first and foremost, you can use it as a tool to sort of verify that this is an OpenZFS distribution, because by definition, it passes all the same tests that all the other distributions pass, right? So if it gets good grades on the tests, then it's an OpenZFS distribution, just like all the others that get good grades on the test. If we're all running the same sets of tests, then we have a more distributed sort of base of knowledge, right? We have different platforms that might expose a bug that would lie latent on your platform, and you get the benefits of the fix for that before you run into a problem, maybe. And we can also get more tests from other people, which is really handy. I wasn't really able to come up with any cons. I think that there's some coordination effort that's required, so there's an investment there, but I think doing this, the benefits really would pay off. I think it would be useful.
So John, is the biggest challenge for like to take Test Runner today and run it across multiple platforms? Is it just paths and flags and options for like the different binaries it invokes? Is that the biggest challenge?
I would say that the biggest challenge is disk nomenclature, right? So pool creation. But in cases like with pool creation and like what you said, I looked at what the BSD guys do, and actually, is that, yeah. So the BSD guys have ported all the STF tests, or most, a lot of them look like, into a different framework called ATF, which is pretty cool. I only started reading about it yesterday, but they have things like wrappers for DF, where for us it's DF-F, and so they just use the wrapper and translate, basically. So that's how that problem is circumvented, and I think it would be similar for disk naming. You can just have a sort of abstract interface that doesn't really, almost like the VFS, right? You use the vendor appropriate partitioning. So, which brings up another question. Like, obviously, a lot of people have done work to port those tests into ATF, and I wouldn't necessarily want to say, well, this is the framework you have to use because it's the OpenZFS framework. I would like to see Test Runner get more use, obviously, but I don't think it should be a prerequisite.
Do you guys have a lot of experience with ATF?
A lot of experience with it?
Yeah, like the framework itself.
I don't personally have a lot of experience with it. Alan Summers, inspector, does. He actually did a lot of the porting of STF to first ATF and then its successor, which is WK.
Oh. When was that?
I don't know if that stuff was pushed or not. It's kind of in preparation for what's going to happen with FreeBSD, just like NetBSD is going to transition from ATF to QA. Same author as ATF. But to solve some issues with ATF that I don't right now remember. So do you have questions about it, or?
No, I'm just trying to get an idea of like if people have looked at both and trying to establish like is there one that would work better? Do we have to Is there more work that needs to be done in the other? Can we take experiences from test runner and ATF or
probably the
STS?
best person would be like Alan. You could probably look at test runner for a day or so and then provide some feedback about the differences between all three.
That'd be very useful to me.
And have you guys, has Linux looked at any test framework at all?
We've looked at it a little bit, what you guys have done. I think our takeaway was it would be really great if this was a standalone sort of thing that could be done for all the implementation. But what the test framework is doesn't matter to me particularly. But from my point of view, the key point is making it easy to run on various platforms. Yes. Right? And if that's test runner, great. That's ETF, great. I don't think we managed to get the old STF stuff working on Linux a couple of times, but it fell out of service quickly because we saw all the test failures and we're like, well, okay, this isn't going to be as useful as we hoped.
Right.
So I have a question though. So this was merged into the Illumos code base. Why wasn't it intentionally left separate from the Illumos code base? So it'd be like in part of the OpenZFS repo to make it as easy as possible for people to grab and run.
It was a conscious decision to have the tests live with the source, so that as the source, one of the things that I saw in some that was problematic in QA is that like you have these two branches that are like progressing at separate rates, and a lot of times, more often than I'd like to admit, people would run the wrong version of the tests on the newest bits. And so they'd come and they'd say, well, I just wasted 2 days of my life and I have these 50,000 failures, right? Can you tell me what's going on? Yeah, and the wrong tests, which kind of sucks.
I mean, it's very common, like, ZFS list, you add a new property, and ZFS list, if you're running the wrong ZFS list test, it fails because it's like, oh, I'm expecting 20 properties and there's 21. Right.
So but isn't that something you could build into the test framework for knowing what functionality is supported and what isn't? Otherwise, we're kind of talking about everybody having their own version of this, right? Based on what stuff they support. What functionality is there and what isn't.
Well, I think that the idea, that's why the idea is to have this live with the code, with the implementation of ZFS. So that
with the OpenZFS.
Yeah, so the idea was for this to live with the implementation of ZFS, which there is no OpenZFS repo today, so that was Illumos. I think one of the things I was going to ask you is like, should this be part of the OpenZFS repo? Because it kind of seems like it should be.
I think that would be a great place for it. And in answer to your other question, I'm sure ATF or QA has a facility for this, but the test runner basically takes a configuration file. And right now, I have one for Illumos and one for Delphi specifically. And as it happens, they're identical, but if we had one for Linux and BSD and Mac, then
that defines like which tests are to be run on each platform.
Right. And so tests that are relevant to you just exclude.
Can you solve the problem of running the test framework against the volume or the ZFS global version number?
Yeah, so you have like the git hash, and then it's just like, oh, does this git hash the one that I know about, and then you have to like list every git hash that each git hash.
Well,
like,
that's what we call that's a little too fine grained. But previously we have like a previously version, and if you make it a major change, then you're supposed to pump it. So if you have stuff where the test frameworks are going to fork and fast, maybe not. I mean, like to me, it sounds like if they're bundled together, it's less of a problem.
Right, and that was like I never even thought of that.
It's a good reason to change the version numbers. If tests start failing or you change the external appearance as the test sees it, then that's kind of a protocol change from ZFS to the user. That protocol, But
that makes more sense than the model of like a single Z-pool version number, which is what we used to have. But now that you have feature flags, so you have lots of different lots of different features going off in different directions, kind of many different. You don't need one version number. You have many things to kind of map onto some set of tests. It might be more challenging.
Yeah. And also with a protocol like that, how do you account for? Well, I'm running these tests, but this is a crazy experiment I'm doing in ZFS. This is like something that's not in any tree. It's not something I really necessarily planned. I'm just playing around to see if, if I'm changing interfaces along those lines. How do I run the test runner at all if it expects, you know?
Yeah, one other way to think about it, and I don't know if this helps, because at least in my mind, it's like, is there any advantage of having them apart? I don't see it. Can't think of any. Because to me, I think if the code and the tests are together, then whatever version I've
Checked out.
cloned, checked out, I know that it's compatible.
So it's like if I'm testing something that's like I have a product and it's based on some old version with some backports, then I can check out that version of the code which has all the tests in it and then run the tests that are in that thing.
So that makes sense to me from a developer point of view, but I would love to see this as something users could run, right? They go to the repo, they drop out of their system, they run it, and it passes all the tests. It's actually compliant and correct.
Right.
I mean,
That should totally work, right?
Well,
assuming
what
that
version do you get? When you
Whatever
do that?
version, I mean, when you distribute ZFS on Linux, right?
Sure.
So with ZFS on Linux comes the test suite, and you run the test suite that comes with the ZFS on Linux.
And then I have a version of the test suite packaged with ZFS on Linux for that particular version.
Yeah.
And then you just kind of coordinate through some common repo for the tests.
If it's the repo, if it's the same repo that the code's in, logically you just build, whenever you build your package, you include.
It includes
You
tests.
either build, you're gonna have the version of that package, so either you build the tests in the same package or a different package at the same time.
Right. For us, it's a different
There are two
package.
reasons for a test suite. One is to check the thing that is there in front of you in that repo. Another is to have like a big web page of like ZFS test suite run on Illumos and FreeBSD and Linux and all these things to show relative levels of compliance. And we've been focused on the former use case. There's still kind of something semi-interesting to be said for the latter use case.
Like, in that case, are you thinking more of like, these same exact tests will be run on like all the different code bases, sort of?
Something like that. Something to show like, kind of, it's like the JavaScript dick measuring that people do that I don't really understand. It's like whose thing is fastest, compliant, test stuff.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't think that we really want to go to the level of like creating like all these standards, and that's a lot of.
And maybe that's a different type of test suite or something.
Yeah.
Anything else? Oh yeah, so I think the OpenZFS repo sounds like a great place. And this slide is basically all about the questions you asked earlier. But yeah, and I thought I saw somebody was giving a talk on FMA or an FMA work-alike. Who was that? Is that?
I got the comments on it at least.
How do you handle the absence of that facility in the tests that you run now?
We don't run those tests.
Okay.
So we test them manually, basically.
So I know you said you have an automated build system and it does regression testing. Is that Z-test or?
So we do Z-test and we do basic products compliance testing.
And is that
Right,
FS
so-
tests?
XFS tests.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's kind of where I get the notion that the test suite should be decoupled, right? There's a well-defined, well, POSIX, right? There's a well-defined interface that hasn't changed in forever, right?
Yeah.
And you know
But this
how
is
it's going
not,
to behave.
right?
This is not.
And Z-test is in the Quartz code base. You're using it today, right?
Yes.
If this had been in the code base and it worked, you
I
probably would have ported it over and you'd be running it today.
I would absolutely use it.
So, I think this is all about like lowering the barrier to entry and trying to keep it simple. Keep the test suite simple.
But I think along those same lines, it probably makes sense for us to like also incorporate some generic. like,
ZPL layer testing.
Yeah, ZPL layer testing. Then.
Like, I mean, maybe this XFS test thing should also come and hang out in the OpenZFS repo as a,
Something.
I don't know.
That sounds like a good idea to me. You said it was from FreeBSD, right?
No, it's from SGI originally.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
It was the original XFS test suite. It's been extended over the years to work on most of Linux file systems, and it just grows a crazy number of tests out.
And I think on macOS you have is it a different VFS layer testing?
Zero testing.
Well,
Is that portable? Yeah, we can port that over to this platform?
So we're definitely needing it.
Okay.
Test setup is quite interested in finding something that works for us. If you looked at SDF, there's a lot of porting work to get it to run. We need something.
Yeah, for the test runner, the only things you should need to port are Python, which you have, and then some work to fix how, oh, that's true, yeah, KSH, and fix all the tests to understand your disk names, which I don't have any idea how that would work, but it doesn't seem like an impossible problem. So, this has already been mentioned earlier today. One of the things that I've talked about before is something along the lines of what was described earlier, an automated facility where you just say, here's my repo, right? And then you go away, it pulls your bits, it builds your bits, it tests your bits, and when you come back from drinking coffee or whatever, you have a set of results that are there waiting for you. I think that would be really awesome. But there's infrastructure and somebody to actually write all that stuff.
I mean, is this basically like similar to what we have internally at Delphix? Okay, so like Jenkins plus some other
Jenkins
things.
plus something like eCenter.
Yeah.
And
I think one of the tricky things is like, how do we run, who runs this, and then how do you like manage those computers, and like they're on the internet, and then you have security concerns, and like, I'm not a DevOps guy. Maybe we need some DevOps guy to come and like tell us how to do all that stuff correctly.
Because in theory, this or something like it is something that we should all be doing, and it would be in our best interest to do it together.
I mean, essentially, like right now, we have like the we do this, but the protocol is Poseidon. Right? Like somebody mails them your patches, and then you apply the diffs, run it through our internal stuff, and mail them back the test results. Right?
I just go to my Poseidon dashboard.
Yeah.
Submit a job.
I mean, maybe like
It's even better than that, though. You don't even submit any patches. You tell me bug numbers.
Yeah, but for external people, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like, I mean, but maybe we could automate some of that so that it's like we can just run everything behind closed doors, and it's like, you send an email with the GitHub hash, and then like somebody like copies and pastes that into a web form, and then all the automation happens. It generates an email with the results, and then you just forward email back to the original submitter.
My goal for us internally was to set up eventually a GitHub repo that you would be able to push, like, I want to push this, and like, here's a branch, and then it would do all the testing and mail you when it's done and tell you what the status of this build. We don't have time for that.
We have folks who do that for other repositories, so it's just a matter of combining Jenkins jobs.
It's just taking all the scripts I run manually now and running them automatically on push.
Yeah. On pull requests. When somebody says, I want this to go in.
Oh, not using pull requests.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, it's the same idea, right? They send you a branch ID or a git hash or whatever, and then you go run the tests. Yeah.
Kind of what you're describing, there's something called for Jenkins a GitHub pull request. So basically, you integrate your GitHub repository with this plugin to Jenkins. You can basically submit a pull request, and then someone on the GitHub site basically says, go and test this pull request, and then the Jenkins system will take that pull request and then build it, and then if you hook in and test it, and then only if it passes all the building and testing does it actually do the work. So a lot of people who do CI in these kinds of systems.
So this is like automated conditional integration. Like
it's automated plus having some person in the loop to say, take this, test this.
Interesting. Anybody else have other ideas of what they would like to see new and different in ZFS testing? Other than more? Which,
So is this in the form now where I could pick it up or in the ZFS on Lake Street and
yeah.
basically track it like we track the rest of the Linux code until it makes it upstream or until we decide what to do about it up in the ZFS repo?
Yes.
There's some known products out there, or
Yeah, there are no notes.
John, who was working on this other than you? Other people from other companies who are interested in testing their products and working with you on this?
We had gotten a few contributions from the community when we were renovating STF, but since then it's gone kind of dark.
Yes, that's kind of what I want to ask is, what else do we have besides ZFS test in this new framework?
Z-test?
What I mean is,
Oh.
yeah.
You mean
can we
in
help
test runner,
support the
or-
other, the older SDF test, for example?
Oh. Are you referring to other tests besides ZFS? Other tests in that Solaris test collection?
Yes.
I would
ComStar and iSCSI, that's what you're thinking.
Right.
NFS, SIPs.
I haven't ported any of those. I would welcome help on any of them. ComStar is something that I'm looking at long term, and I've kind of been thinking about doing it from scratch because ComStar has had some problems, and presumably all the original tests passed, right? So yeah.
We can talk off.
Yeah, let's. But that was all I had. If anybody's interested in getting some tests up and running tomorrow, please let me know. I'm happy to do anything I can to help. Cool.
So why don't we do a quick break now, and then after the break, Adam is going to talk about performance, and then George is going to talk about more performance.
I got my master's.
I have both a little bit of expertise, a little bit of experience. Okay, that would be really cool. Or just what is your experience? Have you used like AutoCon or whatever those tools are?
I've done a bunch of crap about it. I haven't done other stuff. Like teammating. You don't need all. You only need one set of tools. I've done a little bit of off.
We have this
All right. Yeah, that's great. I mean, hopefully that's enough. Cool. All right. Well, that is